Hello, and welcome to the Dementia Capable webinar series provided by the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregiving in partnership with the Georgia Division of Aging Services. Before getting started, we advise having a pen and paper ready to write down any information and links to the resources as they are provided. Otherwise, you will have to view the webinar again to retrieve it later. You may pause the webinar now if needed. Remember that the link to the SurveyMonkey post-test will be pasted onto the last slide. The post-test will remain open for an indefinite amount of time. Please take it at your earliest convenience, though we encourage immediately following the webinar. A certificate can be provided when entering your email address at the end of the post-test. Today's webinar will be Avoiding Responding to Combative Behaviors, presented by Naomi Latini. Naomi is the Training and Implementation Specialist at the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregiving at Georgia Southwestern State University. In this position, Naomi provides technical assistance and consultation to the RCI's Dementia Support Program sites, known as RCI REACH, as well as their military support program, Operation Family Caregiver. Naomi holds a Master's of Science in Sociology from Valdosta State University and a Bachelor of Science in Sociology from Georgia College and State University. Since receiving her graduate degree in 2007, she's been an adjunct professor of sociology and women's studies at multiple universities and colleges around Georgia, to include Georgia Military College and Clayton State University, amongst others. Welcome, Naomi.
Thank you very much for that introduction. As mentioned, we are going to be discussing how to avoid and how to respond to combative behaviors. I do want to give sort of a disclaimer here that this topic is not necessarily a pleasant one, and so we will be talking about some things that are related to violence. So just keep that in mind as we're moving through. Hopefully, though, at the end of this, you're going to have a better understanding of how to handle those situations when they do arise. Anxiety and agitation experienced by people living with dementia can be reduced by recognizing and hopefully eliminating the triggers or what is causing it. So I'm going to try to go through exactly what could be causing these types of behaviors, and then what you can do about it on a sort of a step-by-step, let's try this, and then let's try this format. So first, what exactly are combative behaviors? So what happens in the disease process for someone with dementia? The part of their brain that controls inhibition will become compromised. So in other words, things that they normally would not ever do or would be very unlikely to do, they may be more likely to do. And that's not just combative behaviors. That could be any number of things that people don't do because of inhibition. But of course, in this case, we're talking about these combative behaviors. So when that happens, they're going to be less likely to control their frustration. So, think about it with us, people who, assuming you don't have dementia, you get irritated and you may feel like throwing something or, slapping someone or pulling away from someone, but we don't because of our inhibition. So on top of that, people with dementia are more likely to experience frustration and more frequently because they're not able to do the same things that they used to do. I mean, think about how hard it is for someone without dementia, how frustrating it is if you can't think of a word, that you're looking for in a conversation. So imagine if that happened all the time. It would be super frustrating. And so eventually that frustration can sometimes turn into what look like violent behaviors. So what would those violent behaviors look like? Some possible combative behaviors. Physical aggression. So when you think of physical aggression, we're thinking of like hitting, biting, slapping, pinching, those kind of things, physically hurting or attacking another person. physical resistance when the caregiver is trying to help with something like bathing. So you may be trying to clean them and, help them wash off, and maybe pulling away or pushing you away during that time. Verbal aggression, like yelling or name calling, and that could be to their caregiver or, to someone who they feel like broke in line when you guys are shopping at the grocery store. Throwing things out of frustration. And this could also, it may not seem as bad as the others, but depending on what they're throwing, that could be, it could hurt someone. Destroying property or belongings, so they might rip up things or, smash something that's glass or something like that. And, of course, this isn't every single thing that could happen, but any combination of these things could happen as well. So depending on the severity of the spectrum, because certainly when we're talking about combative behaviors, there is a spectrum. The person that you're caring for may just, try to pull away when you're doing something. So that wouldn't be as bad as if they're doing, several of all of these at once. So there is kind of a spectrum with these. Next, I want to talk about, now that we've figured out what those combative behaviors would look like, what causes those things. And this list is not exhaustive, but we're going to cover some other possible causes as we go through the slides. But these are kind of umbrella, causes that may be causing those behaviors. So first thing would be physical discomfort. They could be in pain. They could be sleepy, thirsty, hungry, or taking medicine with adverse effects, and they don't know how to express that to you. They're not able to find the words, or maybe even they're not sure, which one of those that it is. And again, we're going to talk about each one of these in more detail in just a moment, but just as kind of an umbrella for now. So aside from physical discomfort, it could also be environmental. So if you're in a shopping mall at Christmas time and, it's super crowded and there's a whole bunch of unfamiliar people in an unfamiliar place, that could certainly cause them to want to act out because of their emotions they're feeling. They might even feel that way at home if you move furniture around, if there's people there that they don't recognize. Or I have even seen families who decided not to put up, speaking of Christmas, not to put up their Christmas decorations or other types of decorations because it confused their loved one. They weren't able to, clearly explain, and I guess for whatever reason it disrupted kind of their environment. So there's lots of different ways it could be environmental. Communication is a possible cause, and a lot of times we don't even realize we're doing this, but sometimes the way that we approach them can trigger combative behaviors. So maybe, it's someone who served in the military, and when it's time for their bath, you walk up behind them and put your hand on their shoulder. Something as simple as that could trigger a long-learned memory that could make them, fearful and want to be resisting to you. And then lastly, it's privacy, which I'm not sure how much we kind of think about this, but caregivers often report that these behaviors occur during times when people prefer to be alone, like when you're bathing or toileting, or changing clothes. Caregivers often say that during these times they're most combative, and that makes sense because that is a behavior those are behaviors that we have learned you do privately from a very young age. And so to have a spouse now helping you, or a family member, or to them a stranger, a professional caregiver, it makes sense that would be fearful for them, or they would be fearful and want to act out. So naturally, what I want to spend the most time on is what we can do about it, because these situations could be dangerous, and of course, if nothing else, they're super frustrating, and for everybody, for the care recipient and for the caregiver. So We know it can be challenging, but there are some things that you can do that may lessen the likelihood or the frequency of these behaviors occurring. So what I'm going to do is to go through each one of those possible causes, explain them a little bit more in depth, and then explain some tactics you can try if you think that that cause is the one that's creating the issue. So if the cause is physical discomfort, we mentioned they may be in pain, they may be bored, they may be hungry or thirsty, they may be depressed, sad, lonely, and they may be tired or sleepy. So if you sense this is the case, and how would you sense this, right? Let's think about that. If someone is in pain, they may have their hand over a particular part of their body. That's a natural kind of reflex for most people. If your stomach hurts, you put your hand there, right? If your head hurts, you might rub your temples. If you're itching, you scratch, so kind of paying attention to their body movements. If they're bored, they might be fidgeting with things or fumbling with things, opening cabinets back and forth. That could be the same for if they're hungry or thirsty. If they're depressed or sad, they may be just sitting around, staring at the ground, and then you come approach them and they get angry. So that might be an indicator of that, and they're unable to express what it is they're upset about. And they may be tired. So, and most people know the signs of someone being tired, right? Their eyes may look a little different. They may rub their eyes, yawn, etc. So try to identify, if you think they're in pain, the actual pain source. And then depending on what that source is, it may be appropriate to talk to the doctor, or, they might just have a bug bite or something that needs some medication on it. Find activities or a day program. I'm going to discuss that a little more in depth on the next slide because it's kind of a bigger possible solution. Offer them food or drink if you think they might be hungry or thirsty. And let me say here too, I'll bring this up with communication, but it would probably not be sufficient if the person with dementia is already at the stage where they're becoming combative. It probably would not be sufficient just to say, hey, Dad, do you want me to fix you a turkey sandwich, with some chips and a drink? That may be too much information, or he may be unable to understand what all of those things that you're saying. So what would probably be better is to just get them something to eat and or drink. Finger foods are really good for people with dementia because it kind of takes time, like chips or fried green beans, like things that you can pick up with your hands are better because not only if they're being combative, because not only is it satisfying their hunger, but also kind of providing them with an activity to do. Consider sleep patterns or activities. So if you think they're tired, try and think about the medication they're on, what all you guys have been doing that day, did they sleep well last night, etc. And as always, if you're unable, if you think it's one of these things, but you can't satisfy it yourself, you may want to talk to your doctor. Certainly if they're in pain, if they're having stomach pain or something like that. If you know they have to be thirsty but they're not drinking, it's definitely if you think they're actually depressed, not just lonely but have actual depression, then you always want to talk to the medical doctor. So I said we would talk about activities or a day program on the next couple of slides. So let's think about boredom. I think sometimes because people with dementia are not able necessarily to express to us how they're feeling, we kind of assume they don't get bored, that they don't know what's going on and they, why should we find something for them to do? Or I know I have had caregivers that will say, well, they're not going to do it right anyway, so, I don't want them to help me garden because they're going to just play in dirt or mess up my flowers or whatever. And so those are valid complaints or thoughts, but finding things to keep us busy are essential to the human experience. No one enjoys being bored. It's an unpleasant feeling. So meaningful activities not only ward off boredom, but can give us a sense of purpose and can help provide structure to the day. So some suggestions here. sing songs or listen to music, specifically music from their decade. Pair socks or fold towels. Now that may seem silly, but most people have been pairing socks and folding towels since they were young adults, if not children. So it's kind of one of those super learned behaviors that you can do well into the disease. So, and it would also make them feel like they're helping. They're not just doing some mindless, I guess it is kind of a mindless task, but it's also necessary to take care of the house. So that might be something you could try. You could try playing cards or doing a puzzle, even if the puzzle's not going to be put together correctly, or even if you have to get one with large pieces for a younger age group, that would be okay too, especially for elderly people. A lot of them grew up playing cards and doing puzzles. So that might be a fun thing you could try. Planting flowers. So gardening is actually therapeutic. There's something about getting your hands in the dirt. And for those people who think, well, they're not going to do it correctly, yeah, it's okay if they don't. If you sit on the porch or at your table and you have a couple pots and some dirt and some seeds and maybe a couple flowers that are already blooming, so kind of help them understand the task that you're doing, that would be therapeutic and a fun activity. You could always take a walk. You could fix something, even if it's something simple like, hey, I can't get the back off of this remote control, even if it takes them a long time, even if they forget what they're doing in the middle of it, it doesn't matter. It could be a distraction in the middle of the time when they're bored and getting angry. And then visiting friends. Even if you don't have friends that they recognize that could actually come over, something like going through an old photo album might be helpful as kind of a distraction, but also as something enjoyable to them to do. And look, I think everyone likes to look back at, the quote-unquote good old days of whatever time that is for you. And, it's nostalgic and can bring about warm, fuzzy feelings. So if you think they're bored or you just need a distraction, if you can tell they're getting irritable, any of these things might be helpful. This graphic to the left came from alz.org. 10 tips for activities at home I thought was really helpful is to be flexible and patient, to remember that if you assign them to fold towels, don't think, okay, that's going to be done in 1 minute, they'll be folded perfectly, and then we'll go to the next thing. Just let them fold towels, as an activity rather than, trying to meet some kind of goal at the end. Encourage involvement in daily life. So if you're making sandwiches for lunch, ask them to help you make a sandwich. And again, you have to be flexible and patient with that too. Avoid correcting them. So it's not a good idea to say, no, that you're not doing it right, something like that. You just let them do the activity if they're doing it, while helping them to remain as independent as possible. Offer opportunities to make choices. So yes, you have to get them dressed, but say, hey, do you want to wear this shirt or this shirt, and hold them up so that they are having that independence a little bit longer. Simplify instructions. So the example I just gave, you wouldn't want to say, hey, it's time to get dressed for the day. We got to pick out some clothes. We need socks, pants, and shirts. Which of these shirts do you want to wear? That might be too much information. So kind of going through those steps one at a time would probably be easier. Establishing a routine. Routines are good for everybody of all ages. So trying to do at least similar things during the day as often as possible is helpful. Respond to their feelings. We're going to talk a little bit about emotions in a minute, but trying to see the feeling underneath their behaviors. Simplify, structure, and supervise. So supervising to make sure everyone's being safe. And then, of course, provide encouragement and support along the way. I also wanted to talk just a second about adult day centers and respite. If you live in a town that has an adult day center, I would strongly recommend at least checking it out, call or go there. You could get our information at the Rosalind Carter Institute at rosalindcarter.org. We actually have tools that we could provide you with questions that you should ask if you're going to call or visit an adult day center. because they do have trained staff. Usually they have a nurse on staff, if not multiple nurses on staff as well. And they provide opportunities for activities, and they might have activities that you hadn't thought of that you realize the person you're caring for actually loves. Opportunities for socialization, because like we mentioned, they may be lonely, they get bored too, just being around the same people all the time or the same person. And as for respite, don't forget that you need time for yourself too. At an adult day center, that would provide a caregiver with an opportunity for respite, meaning a break, right? Because it is okay to take a break when you need one, even though that is super hard for most people, and we have a lot of guilt over not wanting to do that. But everybody, whether a professional caregiver, a personal caregiver, whatever, everybody needs a break from time to time, and it's okay to take one. And you may find if you use a respite service that the person you're caring for ends up loving it as well. Okay, so we mentioned that the cause of the combative behaviors may be environmental. I have this picture here of what looks like an older, tiny kind of house. I've seen these types of houses before. And at first glance, you may think, oh, that's really cluttered. The carpet is in the wallpaper is just too busy, and there's too many chairs or whatever, and it may not be appealing to you. However, if that is the house that the person has lived in for decades, and you were to come in and try to remodel that room to make it more modern, that may very well make them very upset and confused and more likely to have combative behaviors. On the other hand, because this room is kind of busy, if they've never been to this place before and you take them in there, all of that might be overwhelming to them. That would be unfamiliar surroundings and could cause them to be kind of overstimulated and confused. So you kind of have to know what situation it is that you're in. So they may be feeling overstimulated in unfamiliar surroundings or surrounded by unfamiliar people, or they may feel like they're lost. Even if you sat them in that chair right there on the right and you were sitting on the left, but then you got up and went to the bathroom, and 2 minutes later they may think, I have no idea where I am, and who came with me. And for any person, that would cause a feeling of fear, and frustration and maybe anger, and they may be more likely to be combative in that situation. So you can try to keep the environment looking as familiar as possible. I remember my grandmother, she had dementia. She had a stack of newspapers that were super old sitting beside her chair. She didn't add to them, but she just left them there. And I moved them one day because I was going to clean up, and she got really upset with me, which didn't make sense to me because they're old newspapers that you're never going to read again, but that's where they'd always been, and that's where she wanted them. So even those little tiny kind of nitpicky things to keep it looking as familiar as possible. Pay extra special attention to how they act when you have visitors. Sometimes if they don't recognize who the person is and they don't know who they are, dementia can cause paranoia. So they may think it's someone coming to get them, someone coming to hurt them. They may be jealous of the person. There's a wide range of things there. Now, with that being said, you don't want to have to completely say, visitors, I can't have visitors anymore ever. What I have known families to do is to actually put a little sign on the door that says, please be advised, my loved one or whoever has dementia. So that way it's kind of a disclaimer in case the person gets upset that it has made some families that I've known feel better, just in case their loved one was to get angry or upset or whatever when someone came in. Having that there would kind of made them feel like, well, we told them. So that's just an idea. You could also try scheduling outings for the morning. We know that people with dementia have sundowning very frequently. So as the day goes on, especially like 4 and after, they start to get tired and their dementia kind of gets worse after that time. So anything you're going to do, if you have to go to the doctor, you need to run to the grocery store or whatever, and they're going with you, it would probably be best to schedule that for the morning. You can also try a relaxing activity. So we mentioned some activities earlier, but you could try listening to music, going for a walk, sitting on a porch with rocking chairs, especially if it's because of overstimulation or them being fearful of unfamiliar surroundings or people, then trying to remove yourself from that situation and in a non-rushed kind of way, so as not to increase the fear or agitation, but then to try to do something that is relaxing. This next slide, when you think of relaxing activities, that could be good for any time, right? But you may have to think outside of the box, because how often do you want to listen to, the same music, or, how many times could you go on a walk down the same street? I mentioned my grandmother earlier. I don't know how many of you watching this are familiar with these peas, but she used to love to snap these peas. It was almost like a hobby, and the whole family would do it, and we would sit around and snap the peas, and it was very almost intimate experience because we grew them, we did prep them, we did everything, we cooked them, and then the family would eat them. So this for us was something, if my grandmother, even long after her garden was gone, if she started getting irritated, we could say, oh, you know what, we got some peas we need to snap. So it could be anything. I mentioned folding clothes or putting together socks, or any of those things can be relaxing because it takes you away from whatever it is that had upset you in the first place. So any of those things. I had someone just recently tell me that they went, found out her grandmother loved to shuck corn. She just came in the kitchen, started helping one day, and her family ended up going and buying as much corn as they could get because they realized that it would completely distract her if someone said, hey, you know what, we need to shuck this corn. So those are obviously garden examples. You could choose other ones, but you may have to think outside of the box when you're thinking of relaxing activities. If the cause is communication. So I mentioned this earlier, that sometimes you may not realize that the way you're communicating could be upsetting to them. So you may sometimes unknowingly talk like you're in a hurry. You may speak loudly. It's like a thing that people do when someone has dementia or any other kind of illness where people kind of talk more loudly as though their hearing must be impaired also. And of course sometimes it is. But maybe speaking loudly. You may sound as though you're scolding them. Or, you may be scolding them because you're frustrated with whatever's going on and you don't mean to, but, you use a harsher words or a harsher tone than you would normally. You may use difficult words to understand, which maybe to you and I would not be difficult to understand, but for someone, especially in advanced dementia, they're not going to understand every word that comes out of your mouth. And so if you're giving multiple directives at once, it's likely to be very frustrating for them. You may ask several things at one time, like, hey, Dad, do you want to go to the beach, or we could do the mall, or I don't know, are you hungry? That's too many things. So doing one thing at a time is much better. And that's the same for giving several directives. I used the example earlier of clothing. You wouldn't want to say, okay, it's time to take a bath, so let's take off your clothes, go in the bathroom, turn the water on. That's too many things. You would just do one thing at a time. So what can you do about this? You can try to, of course, speak calmly and clearly while using a kind voice. Use simple words to give instructions that are going to be understood very simply as well. So rather than saying, come on, let's take off our clothes and get in the bath and all that, you could just say, it's bath time, let's go in here. And then while you're doing that, use physical clues because they may have forgotten what the word bath means. So if you grab them by the arm and try to guide them into the bathroom, they may not understand what you're doing. They may think, I don't have to go to the bathroom. Why is she, pulling me in here? So try to use physical cues, like pointing to what you're talking about, or I mentioned if you think they're thirsty, don't ask them, would you like some tea? Just get them some tea, or same if they're hungry, whatever. Like using physical cues may be helpful so that to be sure that they completely understand what you're saying. And again, this communication, we know that you get frustrated as someone who's dealing with someone that has dementia. And so there's no fault, I don't think, in any of this kind of miscommunication if you're doing it because you're frustrated. It's just important to take breaks for yourself to be sure that that happens as minimally as possible. I mentioned this earlier that we were going to talk about emotions. Try to focus on the feelings of the person during these combative behaviors. Look for the emotion behind their actions. So rather than focusing on why are they yelling at me, I've never done anything to hurt them, I don't understand or whatever, it would be more helpful to think, okay, she's yelling, what was happening right before this? Oh, I was trying to pull her into the bathroom, maybe, or she was fumbling in the kitchen back and forth, and I told her it's time to leave to go to the doctor, but maybe she's hungry, right? So try and look for the emotion behind that. And when you do get frustrated, remember that they don't enjoy feeling that way either. It's not a pleasant feeling. If you can think of yourself when you get angry, it's not an enjoyable experience for most people. So it's not enjoyable for them either. So trying to remember that it is the disease and not the person that is causing that behavior to occur. And again, I want to close with saying, take care of yourself. Know that sometimes you do not have all of the answers, but you're doing the best you can do, and that is all you can do. Even by listening to this webinar, you're showing that you're trying to do the best you can. And please also remember with any of these things, if you think you might be in real harm, then always reach out to a medical professional. Even if the combative behaviors are just minimal, I would still go ahead and let the doctor know, because there may be medications or other tactics not mentioned here that could make that better. I hope you have enjoyed this. For more information, you can always reach out to rosalindcarter.org. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naomi. It was such a pleasure. Just a reminder to viewers that the link to the SurveyMonkey post test is pasted onto this last slide. Please take it at your earliest convenience. A certificate can be provided by entering your email address at the end of the post test. Please remember to view the other webinars in the Dementia Capable webinar series provided by the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregiving in partnership with the Georgia Division of Aging Services. Thank you, and we hope that you'll join us again.